These are the numbers for Ted Dexter in his Test career. 62 matches, over 4,000 runs, just a tick under 50 his average with 900s, and 327 matches in first-class cricket and over 21,000 runs. Plenty of wickets too. I'm going to leave the numbers, David Lloyd and Michael Atherton, for a bit. And let's talk about Ted Dexter, the man. You both knew him. You knew him quite well. He led quite a life.
He did, and you're right. People won't remember him for the numbers. They'll remember him for the way that he played. He was a great stylist and played with great flair and adventure, lots of charisma. This is a sad day because he was a great England cricketer, but it's also a day to celebrate a full and varied life. He was 86 and he squeezed every last drop out of life. Not just a brilliant cricketer, a brilliant golfer. He'd have done you on the golf course, I'm telling you. He's one of the great cricketer golfers. John Woodcock, who died recently, told me that he saw Ted play with Gary Player, and Ted would ping it past Gary Player. So that gives you an idea of how well he hit the ball. Great family man, great sportsman, full and varied life, gave a lot to cricket, not just as a player, chairman of selectors, man who invented the ranking system, which is still used now to decide how, to rank players down the years. So a really interested and varied life that he led. I was very fond of him, gave him my first England cap, made me England captain, and then resigned during the first game that I captained
the writing
England.
on the wall.
I think he thought he'd made an error there.
A great family man, but as we heard in that piece, liked to party.
Well, the 11th Hussar as he went to a party. Do you know, I played against him. 1966, I played against him. And we had Brian Statham and Truman here. Statham is coming down the hill at Hove, steaming in. Dexter, I've not seen before. And he gets on the back foot. He's quite a tall batsman, stood tall. And he hit Brian Statham, no mean feat, back over his head as a back foot shot. So he's played there and back. Wow, what a shot that is. He didn't get many, he got 18. But when he came out to field, I can see him now, he's just practising golf swings. At cover point, just kept practising. And it came out there that he's a tinkerer. And you could tell he was like, he didn't have a club, but he's tinkering and sort of swinging a golf club.
He was a great theorist. He had theories about the game. And he loved watching the modern players. He loved watching Joe Root, because Joe Root was a sideways-on player, and he was a real advocate for sideways-on cricket. He used to ring me from time to time when, an England batsman had got out in a tangle and say, tell them to stop batting with both feet pointing down the pitch, get beside the ball, not behind the ball. So he was full of theories, but there was a clip there of him playing in 63, that innings against Hall and Griffiths, which I think is the one that he'll be remembered for, this great counter-attacking innings, 70 and 75 balls when England were 0 for 1. And I think you're remembered for how you play the game as much as the kind of numbers and the runs that we referenced at the end on that graphic. And he was a man who played the game the right way.
Charles Colville sent me a note. He did that piece and he's interviewed Ted Dexter on many occasions. And he said, my favourite Ted story was from 1968 when he came out of retirement to play in the Ashes. To prove his fitness, he played for Sussex against Kent on a rain-affected pitch on which Underwood was lethal. He hit a magnificent 200, reducing Deadly to an also-ran. When I asked him about it, he said with a hint of bemusement, quote, I can never see the problem with Deadly. Never thought he could bowl, really. But that was his character, wasn't it? Free-spirited.
Debonair and life in the fast lane. He had that motorbike. Do you remember he had a fast motorbike and fast cars? He liked fast cars. I can tell you that I was looking after England under 14s, 15 at the festivals, and I think it was at Oundle School. He was the chief selector, and so he came along to see who was around, Flintoff, Truscothick, Anthony McGrath, Vikram Solanki, etc. And sort of I met him and I played against him, I didn't know him, and he got out of this drop-top sports car and he stood looking at this, and I've sort of gone across and had David Lloyd, Mr. Dexter, nice to meet you. Can I tell you about the lads? I've got Andrew Flintoff, he's going to be a good player, I've got Marcus Truscothick. To which he said, would you like a spin in my new car?
He turned up to a selection meeting.
On a motorbike. That is my first real memory.
Turned up on his motorbike, in his leathers, would take off the helmet, strip off the leathers, suit underneath, take the averages out of his briefcase and would go and have the selection meeting. When he finished playing, he became a journalist, and he flew his family in a plane himself to Australia to cover the Ashes. He loved the horses and the dogs, loved to have a little tickle on the horses and the dogs. Just, you know, one of those people who lived life to the absolute full.
Was he in any way controversial? You know, it wasn't really the done thing for a chairman of England selectors to rock up on a BMW motorbike.
He was eccentric. I remember, before I played Test cricket, I was 12th man at Old Trafford in 1989. Ted was chairman of selectors. He picked Tim Curtis at the top of the order. And I remember I was sitting on the balcony next to Ted in his pinstripe suit, and he was watching Tim Curtis do throwdowns, and he was just shaking his head. And he went down the stairs, through the pavilion, down the stairs, out onto the pitch, in his pinstripe suit, and started to throw balls at Tim Curtis. And Tim had to defend one, leave one, hit one. I mean, he was eccentric.
One of the great theorists, as we've touched on, wasn't he? He loved a theory about batting. We heard about Graham Gooch talking about batting in a bath, because you can't move your feet sideways, you've got to be back and forward.
It's whatever works. I mean, you'd always get that sort of thing, and Graham Gooch there saying, move your feet. And he would say that if you're in a bath, rather than a chamber pot, there's a better word for it, but he said a chamber pot, you're not in a chamber pot, you're in a bath, so you've got to go forward and back. And it's probably a little bit early to say this about the book that he's written, 85 not out, and sadly he's died at 86. It's probably a bit early for this, but the last line in the book, this is how eccentric Ted Dexter was: inevitably, in older life, sex diminishes. But I'll give you some very good advice. Always have a good cuddle before you go to bed. That's the last line in his book.
I'm not sure where to go with this now. I was looking at that footage and reading Charles's note to me about, you know, coming out of retirement to go and take on Australia in the Ashes. I mean, completely different times.
Well, of course, this was the 60s. We're talking about the end of the player, gentleman, the pro-amateur split here. Ted was an amateur cricketer, educated at Radley, Cambridge University, into the England side with precious little county championship cricket behind him. He played as an amateur. That ended in 63, was it? The pros and the gentlemen ended?
Yeah, about that.
At 63. Yeah. You know, not many players could afford just to play for Nautas. Ted, yeah. I think it ended actually in the middle of an Australian tour in which he was captain, and suddenly he was on that tour not being paid anything, and yet perhaps he should have been, because suddenly he was a professional cricketer. So I don't know, it was a different era, as you say. He played the game in a certain manner, with a certain freedom and flair.
He would have enjoyed watching England play yesterday, and he would have enjoyed watching Joe Root bat over the last year.
Yeah, I mean, there's been ins and outs of England, and he was passionate and sort of about technique and so on. And you'd see him around and he'd have a chat, and that's what he'd talk about. And inevitably, he'd talk about side-on and side-on batsmen. And he liked the things that we did with Coley as well, about the back foot and moving. Make sure your back foot is parallel to the crease. Don't come pointing down, because your shoulders are going to come in.
He'd be a good third man, wouldn't he?
He loved watching Joe Root play. Yeah, he didn't much like watching one or two of the others, but he loved watching Joe Root.
OK. Ted Dexter, who sadly passed away yesterday.